Hello again. This is Ronald Allen with Managing Change through Effective Communications. Tonight's topic, communicating violence in kids' cartoons. And the reason why I chose this discussion is because I've been speaking and working with a group of youth in the, northwest Pennsylvania, Mount Airy, beautiful um, community, beauty, vistas, incredible community to raise children. And the parents, I believe it was a gentleman that saw me do some work in Delaware about 3 years ago, asked me just to come up and have a conversation. And so I did a little homework, and I got the kind of a summary of what I'd like to share with you as how cartoons, the violence in cartoons, impacts the way that we communicate, the way that children communicate with us as adults, how children communicate with each other. And I want to throw in a little kind of a spanner, as we say in England, a wrench, if you will. Is it necessary, or why is it necessary, for cartoons to have so much violence? And I'm talking about the type with the black and white, at the time I think it was silent, but why so much violence? So what do you think? I'd love to hear your opinions. By all means, share them at the bottom or even after I complete the little discussion here. But I really would like to know why you think the writers and producers of these very creative animations need so much violence. And one, of course, could be to capture the attention of those that are watching. Some people have said, and even in the reports, that some of these reports that I'll share with you, and I have a few up on the website here, they talk about gaining the attention of unrealistic engagement, unrealistic results, and they are extreme. So you'll see the rolling pin, right? That machine they use to smooth out the macadam. It'll flatten the coyote, or they'll flatten an image, and then the image will pop back up. And we know that that's unrealistic. So that's extreme. Unlike violent movies, where we see the entrails, we can literally taste the brain matter. We know that that is more realistic. So I wanted to start off the discussion, communicating violence in kids' cartoons, with why is it that we need the violence in the first place? Why can't we, whoops, oh, there you go. Didn't pay the bill. There you go. That's a first. That's managing change. So number one, why do we have to have so much violence? There have been some interesting studies. One with a group out of Turkey, Journal of Learning and Teaching in the Digital Age, which is very relevant, obviously, for now. Are kids learning differently? Absolute. Are they able to access more information and pull what seems to be tangent information together? Absolutely. Ozkan Demir, Hamet Atan, and Yücel Gelişi. These are the three contributing researchers and writers to this paper, Journal of Learning and Teaching in the Digital Age. It's out of Turkey, and the reason why I wanted to start with something what would seem to be distant from a Western culture is because there are some common traits, even when we talk about girls in Nigeria learning and children in Pakistan learning and experiencing cartoons. And some of them are certainly Western, others are Japanese, and others have been cultivated by their own culture, their own society, their own media. Their common trait, though, is violence. So if we're communicating that at an early age, if we don't have the outward manifestation of going out and killing somebody, which obviously it's not occurring, it is a minor, if any, direct impact of that, there is a behavior in the way that we communicate. And more importantly, as I say in project management and change management, optimizing each and every opportunity. So right there in effective communication, strategic communications, are we making best use of the asset and resources at hand? And you as parents, you would decide that. Again, managing change is about bringing you the resources so you can make more informed decisions. And then if it doesn't work out the way you want it or expect it, or it's laid out for you, you're okay with adjusting. You're okay with saying, no, the combination, the way that I implemented a strategy or initiative didn't work out the way I wanted or husband, wife preferred. So it's a freeing up of our thinking, right? It's a way of saying, oops, got to get rid of that information there. It's a way of saying, I'm going to take this information. It's new information. It's something that maybe I have not considered. And instead of saying one extreme or the other, there are gradations. And in those gradations, there's a timeline that maybe things will change and typically do. And so I will adjust. I'm willing to adjust. I am being adaptable, right? I'm being a chameleon. I'm learning to understand that life is a matter of give and take. And that's a better way of addressing my challenges. So why violence? And in this report, Journal of Learning and Teaching in the Digital Age, this is a study in Turkey with children watching cartoons. They realize that there are significant cultural preferences because of, and check this out, this is really interesting, England and a number of other countries had gone into Turkey for economic reasons and significantly impacted generations of people. It is that influence that in the cartoons they found that the children would prefer to be more like English kids, or that culture that they thought they should have. Now that's an interesting perspective, because most reports simply talk about the findings. Yet this is a perspective that has 2 or 3 or 4 generations impact down the road. So it's not just a cartoon. In other words, my image of myself, my interpretation of what has occurred or what I would like to be, has been influenced for me by occurrences way before I realized, or even before I was born, quite frankly. Parents do that to children all the time. They put a wish list that they have not accomplished on their children. In this case, in this report, they said that children had identified with other cultures and images of other nationalities and exhibited that behavior. That's very powerful. That is strategic communications. If that's not a gambit, I don't know what is. Another, one component of communication is to affect culture, which is, in this case, in Turkey, it certainly does. We should also recognize that in the messaging, in the medium that we use, we should realize that reading, writing, you remember that one, writing? Memorizing, poetry, what's poetry? Prose, songs, rhythms, religions, social norms, language itself, because in these countries there's dialects, there's regions, there's jargons, there's all these different subtleties, even within the language, even within the spoken word, style, proverbs, and even superstitions. Now think a moment. Here you are speaking to a group of people, And in fact, it happened to me just the other night. Young guy comes up and says, "Hey, old G." I turn around like, "Who's old G?" And he says, "You're old G." So I won't say what I actually said, but I corrected him. 3, 4 minutes down into the conversation, he turns around and says, "I like you. I'm calling you old G." And I had to give it to him because the juxtaposition, right? The play, the firmness of how I responded, and his ability to absorb it, understand it, and still come back. I said to him, "Okay, you can call me old G." So that is an effective strategy and an understanding, cultural nationality, of how people are impacted by their impressions in society. And in this case, for the cartoon world, where I said, "You know what? I'll go with it. You're cool. You stood the barrage of my my own personality at this time." But understand, in writing, in reading, in creating songs, right? Listen to some of the music in the cartoons, and then what is the image that the characters are sending you, the message that they're sending you. For example, in the 50s and 60s, anytime you saw any kind of images dealing with Africa, there was a certain sound. Well, that sound gets registered in your mind. It becomes part of your subconscious. And the sound, image then come together in the future, even though only one element might be present. That's what's happening with cartoons. Someone acts up a certain behavior, the image of that behavior, of that character, with sound, is indelibly imprinted on you. Okay, so Ron, what the heck are we doing with this? How am I going to benefit from this? When you hear a sound, just like a smell, a touch, a conversation, are you reacting? Are you listening? Or do you understand where it might be coming from? Do you ask for clarification? First of all, for yourself, and then for the people that are around you, which is really cool when you do that. Because people are like, "Oh, wait a minute, I thought you were, and my understanding was, and the perception of you is wrong." That's why we don't get along. That's why the communication is stalled. That's why your members of your employees at work don't give you 113%, because you're not sensitive, which is a hard skill. It is not a soft skill. Your sensitivity is not registering with them. You haven't tapped out the right code. Think of the, the praying mantis. The male has to tap out the right code, otherwise it's gone over with. In fact, in many cases in nature, maybe not death, certainly you're not going to mate with this individual, with the opposite sex. So in cartoons, it gets a little heavy here, right? I mean, think about it. I'm talking about cartoons. I'm talking about fun, laugh, jokes, ba-boom, the typical rhythm of a cartoon. Yet, when we take it into our day-to-day interactions with one another, we start to see that our own behavior can be influenced significantly, our responses, our anticipations, our understanding of what we're looking at, why it's not jiving, why it's not responding, why is someone not responding to me in the way my mind sees them. And that's because we underestimate this kind of messaging. Now in Pakistan, in India, it's even worse, because what they're doing and what they are currently doing, there's a company, I believe it's, oh my goodness, it's a very well-known beauty, cream, women's cosmetics company. They put in place some 65 marketing managers, like account managers, who are going to lead the distribution, marketing, and exposure of their products because there are so many diverse groups and sects in India. Sects in India. I hope I said that right. The sad part about this is they are using these different media, direct advertising, also imagery that show a disdain for the darker skin and also a preference for the lighter skin. Now, let's not get typical reactions here. This is marketing. This is about serious dollars and revenue. And they're going to do what they're always done, and that is to influence you. When we talk about managing change through strategic communications, through effective communications, it's understanding these gambits, it's understanding these methodologies, and then deciding for ourselves how we're going to respond. Instead of going blindly into the night thinking, oh, it's no big deal. Because, and I've said this before, it's our kids. The legacy is that our children, grandchildren are now endeared to that. They think that's what they should do. And I'll tell you, it doesn't matter about color of skin. Take Second World War with the cadets from Germany who gave up their own families because of a cause, because of an ideology. So we have to talk about psychology. We have to talk about socialization. We have to talk about anthropology. We have to bring these in context. I've always said it's an eclectic perspective. Managing change is an eclectic perspective on the topic of managing change through effective communications. And communications encompasses everything. Touch, smell, sound, past experiences, future experiences. Imagery, what people say and don't say to us, what they say to others and don't say to us. Some people might say it's too much. I just want to ride off into the sunset. Let's remind you, if you haven't already realized, the last 5 or 10 years, and in fact the last 20 years, labor has been assaulted by a thing called sovereign rights for global corporations. Oh boy, where is he going with this one? Just like cartoons are a veneer for a different message. Well, sovereign rights for corporations has taken away the rights for the basic citizen of a country to strike. Because if the company, global sovereign entity, can show economic plight by these workers, the government has now given these corporations the right to fire the employees and get new employees. And there's always going to be other employees who are worse off than you. Back to the cartoon. Isn't this fun? Let me also share with you Dr. David Hill out of Wilmington, North Carolina, not Wilmington, Delaware, I'm afraid. He talks about seen and unseen imagery even within cartoons. And the difference is the diagnosis of behavior. In some cases, he talks about children between the age of, was it 4? My numbers are terrible here. 4 and 6 just see action. They just see images. But past 6, they start to try to connect with those characters and their behaviors in their homes, and worse yet, in school. You've all seen the child acting out. We call it ADHD. We call it all kinds of titles. It is the lack of parenting, and I've always said that. I always still believe that, even with all this media. And then the overlay, heavy overlay, almost like molasses, if you will, of all the stimuli, going back to the digital age of teaching with children, of how children are allowed, like weeds, to take in all this information. And I know people will say, well, how do you stop it? Well, I know parents that on Sunday there is no TV, no cell phones, no laptops, nothing. I know some parents that during school there's only a certain amount of hours that they're going to be on those computers, and they are monitored, because all this technology can be monitored, that it is school related. So instead of obfuscating and always saying that you can't, and then seeing the result of our children, because that's really the legacy, isn't it? It's not about us. I mean, we're older, we're pretty much indelibly set in our ways. I am not. I'm always the exception. Um, then, then what we're doing here, looking at cartoons, looking at movies, looking at any form of entertainment, certainly even in the reading, as it says, songs, rhythms, poetry, prose, language itself, how we speak, impacts our children. And that is a communication error I don't think we should just allow because we're tired. If we're tired, fine, rest. I have a poster right here, rest if you must, but don't you quit. I've had that for years, and I read it constantly. That's another thing, by the way. There is so much information coming in. The communication channels are literally overloaded. How are you reinforcing and sustaining what direction you want to go in with such issues such as watching a basic cartoon? Remember, some kids watch these cartoons over and over again. It's like games, right? They do the game over, play the game over and over and over. That's how we learn. Reflection is the state of learning. And then we become what we're exposed to. How else do we program ourselves? People hate the term programming and propaganda. So let me ask you this. How did you learn to walk? How did you learn to ride a bike? How did you learn to drive a car? It was repetition. All right. So if it's repetition and I want to change or adjust or learn or benefit from, what must I do? I must create repetitious behavior and do it over and over again, because that's how our subconscious begins to learn. And then our conscious, which just happens, we make the action a reality. Now, there's also some information here about unnecessary violence and wanton violence, even in cartoons for kids. Unnecessary violence is when you see one character beating another over the head and the character falls down, and then that first character continues to beat. Now, haven't you seen children playing together and they exhibit that same behavior? Where did it come from? Oh, I'm not blaming cartoons. It's an observation. So we have a distinction between unnecessary violence and wanton violence. Fast forward to the 15, 20, 30, 40-year-old who uses excessive force. Is there a connection? Psychologists believe there are. Sociologists know that there is. When we talked about Turkey, Pakistan, India, Nigeria, the girls in Nigeria, this is interesting. The girls that went under their study were, I say girls, boys and girls. The girls, though, exhibited more violent tendencies than the boys, which was interesting. Because many, and I thought, there you go, there's a perception, which I'm wrong. I thought the boys would, because typically the boys are held back, even though the girls are not as quickly to go to school. But the boys are held back in certain fields. So I would have thought they'd be more aggressive when they are given an opportunity or exhibit a certain visual. But the girls are more aggressive. I think that's good. Also, another interesting thing about the Nigerian culture is they actually want to keep their own as the primary imagery. They actually are looking to create in the media, in the schools, in the performing arts. They want to create their own stories. They want to reinforce that which is lost. So that's also interesting, isn't it? There are some cultures that want to assimilate into the mainstream of of where they are. Whereas there are some that say, no, I want to push back. In fact, many native indigenous people to what we now call America, USA, are constantly relearning their language, playing out their ancestral celebrations, and teaching their young. Because what's happening, and this is another part, by the way, of why managing change through effective communications is so important, because we're going so far to an extreme. I don't know, left, right, you call it a name. We've gone so far, we don't know who we are. Half of us have forgotten what our ancestors had to go through. And what does that mean? It means that there has to be a balance. Why? Because life demands that there's a balance. Trees only grow so high. Most animals only grow so big. Even the great blue whale is the biggest mammal on the planet. Checks and balances. It's a rhythm. It's a balance between lows and highs. If you take corporations at a certain production, below a certain production, they go out of business. Above a certain production, as we've seen, Enron, Tyco made off with his investments, which was a Ponzi scheme from day one. Although he was, by the way, president of the stock exchange, so understand something. He had money. He wasn't, McMansion. He was the mansion. But these companies, Anderson Accounting, AIG, they cooked the books. They did things that were inflating the value. So there's a stream. Think of it as a stream, right? It won't go in my face. There's a stream. There's a stream. There's a level at which we operate optimum. We use that term, optimum performance. And some people just feel, well, no. I mean, I want to make more or do more or create more. Even in buildings. Buildings can only be so big. They have to, or if they're bigger, then you have to put more bigger footings in, or pylons, or the structure has to be redesigned in order to facilitate the larger mass. So I'm going to finish up tonight communicating violence in kids' cartoons. Effective communication. It is one. Why do cartoons have to have the violence? Is it absolutely necessary? Is there another way of still enjoying the same animation, the slapstick comedy, if you will? Number two, that it influences second and third generation to begin to move away, in many cases, from the culture of the parents. And number three, in some cases, it reverts children back to wanting to find out more about themselves, and in others, to create different images and begin to create a new lifestyle. Reading, writing, poetry, language itself, proverbs, even superstition, all plays a role. And it's a matter of applying these as you need, as you see, as life is coming at you. If things are going well, still take note. If things are not going so well, things need to be adjusted. The combination, the recipe has to be adjusted. This is Ronald Allen, Managing Change on live chat. Won't call it Facebook live chat because I'm posting these also to YouTube, Google, and a few others. And we'll be actually pushing it out onto a new platform. Facebook has too many adjustments, and they just disturbed my rhythm on my 4 different profiles. We've got a community group, Managing Change. You can go in and see that one. There's I think likes a page, and so you'll still see me present these discussions. The coaching is definitely coming out. Finally, my God in heaven, right? Everyone will have gone to sleep by the time my coaching program starts, but that's okay. We'll persevere. Yes, we will. And of course, you can check out. So I've got some audio files, Managing Change in 60 seconds. Those are pretty cool. That I got from Twitter with its 150 or 70 characters. 60 seconds is 170 words, and I've done a number of audio files to support some of my work here. So I enjoy doing this for you. By all means, give us some comments, because this one is kind of a sensitive issue. You think cartoons, easy, pleasant, laugh, joke. The undercurrent, the message underneath, though, is quite profound. Ronald Allen, Managing Change. You know where to find me.